Now, the last part of my talk is dedicated to an exhibition that shares similar aesthetic and political concerns with Lena's museum. Royce and Daisy, as I told you in the beginning, were commissioned to tell us something about the low end of global trade between Africa and China. And of course, this could be anything. The subject is vast. They went to the Chungking Mansions in Hong Kong. And this is one of the key markets for the low end of global trade. So what you typically have in the Chungking Mansions, and those are basically two high-rises, but with hundreds of shops, hotels, restaurants, and so on and so forth, are African traders who come to Hong Kong on a monthly visa, and they bring some stuff, diamonds, whatever, you could sell to the Chinese, and they bring back what is needed in Pakistan, Africa, Southeast Asia, wherever. I mean, there's an UN report, or an economic report, or economic commentary rather, that states that probably 60 or 70% of cell phones in sub-Saharan Africa come through those Chungking Mansions. But it's like the Europa Center. I mean, it's not a very appealing building, but it is effective. And in the Chungking Mansions, they met with a fellow anthropologist, an asylum seeker from Somalia, whom they were calling the Bull because he needs to be anonymous. The anthropologist, Gordon Matthews, gives English classes at the Chungking Mansions, and they run into this guy. And somehow they got along, and they started to talk. And at some point, he gave them a call, and he told them that I need your help. And as it turned out, he was invested in quite spectacular business deals. Still an asylum seeker, he was selling mining rights in Somalian gold mines to the Chinese business community while bringing heavy equipment, caterpillars and all this kind of stuff to Somalia. But his bank account was closed, and he still had a few deals pending. And he needed help. He needed people who would go with him to a bank and open a new account. And also, Hong Kong is quite a place for free traders. It's still difficult for an African asylum seeker to start a bank account. So he was asking the Chinese and the Australian, the white woman, to help him. And at this point, Royce and Daisy run into a crisis, because so far they were observers, classical anthropologists. They were looking at, how those Africans are doing in Hong Kong. And now they had a chance to cross the threshold and become part of the deal. And they didn't know if they should or not. But they did, happily for us. And they helped the Bull. And so they became familiar, in a very traditional way, and he owed them a favor. And the idea was to tell this whole story of his trade deals and his whole situation as an economically active asylum seeker in Hong Kong at Johann Jacobs Museum. But how to do it? Without producing boring text panels or showing some poor video footage of bank lobbies. As it turned out, the bull was involved in another business deal as well. When he found out that the Chinese became wary of abalone, I mean, those are those sea snails, which are the top délicatesse in gourmandise in China, became wary of abalone coming from the Japanese sea. He remembered that there are abalone at the Horn of Africa, but Africans themselves would never touch it nor eat it. So he helped fishing communities at the Horn of Africa to learn how to fish abalone. And then he shipped the stuff to the dried market in Hong Kong. And they're quite costly. I mean, they cost $200 a kilo. So you can imagine, I mean, what kind of business this is. But for the exhibition, we decided not to ship the abalone, the meat, to Zurich, but the shell. And the shell is quite pricey as well. I mean, there are factories in Guangdong, I mean, in the area around Hong Kong, where they take out the mother of pearl, children mostly, and ship it back to Switzerland, to watchmakers or jewelers. So what we did, and this is something you can only do, I think, with a private museum, is we bought 2 tons of those shells for $100,000. And we sold them with a profit on the next day. But we had them on our premises. And remember my remark about the impossibility to differentiate between figure and ground, between the object and the display. I mean, it has become one. And even more so, they had some surplus value added. They smelled horribly. And 1 hour after they arrived, I had basically to close the museum because of the stench. But of course, I mean, who was I? Naive Westerner, to assume that they would arrive in perfect condition. Actually, they had been smuggled via Djibouti to Dubai. I mean, there is, same with refugee networks, there's also a network of global airports. Also, I mean, in the most rundown countries. So Dubai has a perfect airport. Well, everything else, I mean, around the country is falling apart, or a civil war riven. So somehow, I mean, you have to manage, and you have local experts to do this, to bring this stuff from Somalia into Dubai airport. I mean, as soon as you're in the airport, you also get the stuff to Zurich. I mean, then it's easy. But the difficult part was there. And at some point, it was smuggled as camel fodder. And so you also had those bags with writings in Arab that declared, I mean, those shells to be camel fodder. And accompanying this display was a poem. Because still, there was a challenge to write about the issue. But how? And what kind of genre? And they referred back to another famous trader in all kinds of things. The poet Arthur Rimbaud, who left, I think, with 29 poetry, and sailed from Marseille to Aden to become a dealer in coffee and arms. And at some point in his career as an arms dealer, he sold 2,000 Remington rifles to King Menelik II, who fought the Italian colonizers successfully with it. And in Saison en Enfer, Rimbaud had created this whole hallucinaric trading scenario. And they decided to adopt, this kind of writing poetry, prose, in order to tell the story. And this is, of course, an issue that you face with many anthropologists or artists turned anthropologists, that people don't want to, or they realize that if they keep, this kind of scholarly distance, they won't get it. But if they fall into the trap by romantically identifying with a subject, then also the account becomes totally useless. So you have to find a way of negotiating your position. There's not the one nor the other, but again, the in between. And in order to finish my presentation and to make clear that this Johann Jacobs Museum is not just a place for idiosyncratic indulgence, we had a conference with the Asylorganisation Zürich, an organization for refugees or asylum seekers in Zurich, a body that is state-funded, about the question if it wouldn't be wise to give refugees or asylum seekers more economic freedom. Thank you.
Now we have 5 minutes for questions.
Which I will not ask Pauline, because Pauline will also speak about translation. I'm very much interested in the term of translation in art history.
Yeah.
Maybe you could explain a little bit, because the example you showed with the Chinese porcelain and the object in Hamburg,
The Persian stoneware.
We could say also it's a sort of, I know why you say translation, but we could also say it's a sort of imitation, which is not very much, very successful. I know this is a position which I would not defend. But
No, I think it's incredibly successful. Because it's, it's so much more interesting, the piece, because it tells us so much more. Than, I wouldn't deride Chinese porcelain. I'm quite a huge fan of it myself. But this is a kind of pleasure that wouldn't get you anywhere. While this piece, makes you think. And what else can we expect from a museum exhibition?
in which form is it translation and not a sort of imitation?
There's no translation. The letters are just a hoax, right? Any child could do it. But I think that the question of, this is a vast topic. Translation. Yeah. I will give you, it has nothing to do with my talk, but I will tell you an anecdote, which is quick and perhaps telling. In 2012, I did an exhibition in Korea because I wanted to work in an environment as an exhibition maker, which I cannot control, in order to see, if what I'm doing would make sense. Right? If you do, as a Westerner, exhibitions here in Europe or in the US, then you know more or less what's happening. But there it was really terra incognita. So I needed a go-between. And this is when it comes to translation as a kind of enacted practice. And you might know this example from Godard's Le Mépris, Francesca, who's translating Fritz Lang. And then you have Fritz Lang saying something. Then you have the subtitles telling what Fritz Lang is saying. And then you have Francesca who tells a completely different story. And as a film viewer, you say, oh, my God. And I had a brilliant go-between, not translator, go-between in Korea. So when I was explaining something, and this was a kind of community-based approach to exhibition making, when I explained something, she explained, or she was supposed to translate what I was saying to the Korean audience. But I could feel that she was saying something else. And also, I mean, when the Koreans replied, and then she translated to me, I again knew that, but this does not mean that the result cannot be successful, right?
Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. I have a question concerning translation in a way as well, the translation between Lina Bobardi and your own exhibit in a way. And if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on how Bobardi's concept of museum and also the way she relates to social practice, observing in a way social practice, how this came maybe into play in your own exhibit. Or not your own exhibit, but the project you presented actually between the art trade between Africa and China actually, and how this turned into an exhibit, and if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
I mean, this is a question for Sophia Prinz, our head of research. Social practice was never really my strength.
But you talked about it before.
Huh?
You talked about it before.
Okay, I will. I think this is also a vast topic, and it requires. But maybe there's opportunity in the framework of this conference. What was important for this exhibition about the Museum of Popular Art was first of all the focus. Because Lina is conceived to be an architect, a brilliant architect, and Masby and Seski, I mean, those are things that are well known. But this museum, I would say, is not so well known. So the point was not, of course, to reconstruct it. Also, this was a bit the idea in the beginning, but rather to reconstruct the idea that she had, I mean, in the first place. So why would someone take account of the material culture of a certain place? And what was so radical about her proposal, according to Sophia's theory, is that she proposed to read the social structure of the life world of the people through a tableau of objects. So when usually you have sociologists stuck in analyzing social relations, here you had a constellation of objects. And this was quite radical, to provide people on the one hand with a kind of analysis of the life world of the Northeast, and also to propose this analysis to become the bedrock for an alternative modernization. So that this popular culture, or which is pejoratively called folklore, is not seen as something that needs to be discarded and better forgotten, but as I said, as a springboard. Because you read or you extract people's everyday knowledge and way to handle things from those very modest objects right? And again, one anecdote, to finish this answer. It feels like years, but it was only weeks, with IPACI, with the Heritage Foundation of Bahia, the most incompetent place on the planet. And this, I say, really heartfelt. So we tried to extract the objects, and it was a huge bureaucratic procedure, which is okay. But at some point, it just became suicidal. To pursue this lone attempt. And then, I was totally desperate and didn't know what to do. And I took a walk, or I went with a friend. I don't remember. And arrived at a market, at a place where Westerners are not supposed to go, in the outskirts of Salvador. And I couldn't believe my eyes, but because actually there were the same things. Lina bought in the 50s. Nothing had changed. There were the same carrancas and ceramic bowls and candomblé objects and so on and so forth. So basically, with 500 Swiss francs, we have bought the whole exhibition, right? And the shipment of the objects to Zurich was much more expensive, because then suddenly they were considered to be precious.
Okay, we have two more questions. First Michael and then Jens.
I'm not sure if mine is a question or a comment, but I'll see how it comes up. I'm responding more about the previous questions, but I found your presentation very interesting. Not so much in terms of these objects in transition or in translation, as they're being called, but they seem to be kind of products of what I understood your presentation to be, of a kind of a call for the museum to come out as a kind of a trader, and the museum or the gallery or the place in which these sort of objects are exhibited as an active agent within a particular trade, whether it's the objects from the market in Salvador, or in Lina Bobardi's case, or in the case of the shells with your museum, or in the other examples that you gave. And trading, seems to be a kind of translation in itself. Because if we think of Walter Benjamin's definition of translation as kind of a trade, trade is a kind of translation in the sense that you kind of gain something and you lose something, in the same way that the act of translation kind of betrays the original. So you're always at a loss, when you translate something, you always lose. So it's not so much the mimic kind of fails to accomplish the original, but it kind of betrays the original. I think that's where I'll stop. But there are interesting kind of parallel approximations between an establishment of trade, an activity of translation, and the act of linking. They seem to all kind of interconnect.
This I think this example was crass. With acquiring the shells from Somaliland. But it was okay because both parties could agree upon a price. I think the main problem when it comes to trade is this political asymmetry built in the terms, right? Like gunboat policy, for example. So this is why I'm careful. About this trade aspect, but I agree that it brings us closer to the point. But trade is riven with crime, basically. But again, I mean, crime is also always worth showing and exploring.
I think it's your turn now.
I'll try to keep it short. I'm the other guy from Zurich.
Okay.
I'm eager to talk about you. Actually, just two small comments, really. Because I was struck by the way, just the picture you showed of Green Bart's Museum, how similar it was in a way to a small museum in Rio I had a chance to visit last year, which you probably know, the Museo do Mangue, which is one, I think it's the first favela museum curated by Christians, but we've gone through some kind of curatorial education. But very interesting in terms of how these everyday items are being revalorized there, and therefore also the community itself obviously is being encouraged to look at them and adjudicate it. Interesting continuity. And I guess my other comment was just that I think not just because there have been these much more recent experiences that do in a sense take up that legacy, but also I think in a sense Brazilian modernism is probably not as a whole that different from the approach of Lina Bobardi to popular culture, if at least you take a somewhat broader view than say concretism or high modernism of the 50s. Because in the realm of music, for instance, people like Villa-Lobos would obviously investigate samba very intensively, and even in visual art you have, in a sense, a constant trafficking, and if you want, translation of popular forms of composition into then erudite ones.
Right.
I think what is obviously different in the 60s is this pedagogical, in a sense, pedagogical political dimension that she brings to it, but which again is, I think, in line with Tensei, the domain of pedagogy, the system of failure.
Yes. No, definitely. I mean, I quickly mentioned, that she was not alone. And that also with Cinema Novo, there were so many political and artistic affiliation. She entertained. I think what is particular about her, in my view, is that she came to Brazil with the experience of a failed modernization in Italy. So she knew firsthand almost about Mussolini's shamble and how futile, this grandiose nationalization scheme was. So she had a stronger sense, I think, of urgency because she already underwent the same process. She didn't want to see repeated in Brazil.
Okay, thank you very much.